All right, welcome back to Southeastern 14 here for another episode of House Summit featuring the one and only Nathanael Rutherford. Back here once again, Nathaniel. We were joking after about 2 episodes. We'll see if we make it to three. And what do you know? We're climbing on up there now. What's it, 6, 7, something like that? So
I think it's 7.
uh,
Yeah.
7. Look at that.
Yeah. I think our notes up here say 6, but I'm pretty sure we're at 7 now.
Well, again, don't count on me to keep up with the math. But yes, we are back here, and as we said last week, we were thinking, hey, maybe we'll have a couple new videos to post before the next kind of Tuesday cycle that we've been on, but that was not the case because, as we know, Virginia Tech got the win over Tennessee in the NCAA tournament Sweet 16, 73-64. That happened this weekend or this past weekend, and I guess Nathaniel, we knew I think going in it was going to be a tough kind of game. We talked about the matchup and pointed out kind of what could be the things that could be good for Tennessee, kind of in their favor. We also pointed out who to look for on the other side, and it kind of turned out that way in terms of just looking in sort of we've always said, I think, about this team since we started doing this was certainly important to get off to a good start, and you know didn't necessarily happen in that first half. Had to kind of play catch up, and just wasn't enough there in the 9-point loss.
Yeah, getting off to a good start did not happen on
Yeah.
Saturday. They trailed 9-0, and I think 11-2, and it felt like they're missing. I mean, they did for the first little bit. They're missing every shot, and it wasn't that they were taking bad shots either. That was the thing. It was like Virginia Tech's shots were going in, and Tennessee's just weren't. And then finally, you saw Tennessee start going in. Lady Vols started having a lot more success and got it down to 2. And I think they ended up cutting it to 1, if I remember right. They're in the third and maybe even early fourth quarter.
Yeah.
But give them a lot of credit. They did the same thing they did against LSU and fought back from a huge deficit in the second quarter and third quarter. But it's really hard to do it one time and come back from an 18-point deficit. It's really, really hard to do it a second time. They maybe even reached 19 in this game. I don't remember. Point is, it was a almost 20-point deficit that they fell into before making their comeback, and it just fell short. And I think, to me, the biggest takeaway from that game, I believe I said it in our podcast last week, Blake, and if I didn't, I should have, but I'm pretty sure I did, was that my biggest concern wasn't, from the roster standpoint, wasn't Kitley for Virginia Tech. It was Amore, because she played really well against Tennessee last time, and she's just a really good player. And oh my gosh, I'm still having nightmares about her, Blake. I mean, she just went off. I mean, she had a phenomenal game. It scored 29, I think maybe 30 points in that game. It would just seem like every time they needed a bucket, she would hit a 3, or she'd drive in and hit a nice mid range. Like, she was doing everything for them. Like, she looked every bit of a all-American caliber player. I mean, she was phenomenal for them. The other posts were, the post wasn't, they didn't do a bad job at it by any stretch of the imagination. Kitley, I think, had a pretty decent game. But I will say the rebounding disappointed me. It seemed like Lady Vols didn't get, were as good at rebounding as I expected them to be in that game. There just was a lot that went wrong for Tennessee in that game. And it all started with, like you said, they didn't get off to a good start. And we've talked about this year when they have needed to, I wouldn't say, I guess, technically pull off an upset, but when they've played teams that are, matched more, evenly with them, getting off to a good start is key. And the only game where that wasn't true was against LSU. And this one had similar makeups where, you let the team that you're playing get a big lead on you, and then you were able to finally, I won't say wake up, but finally start playing better basketball or start playing more within yourself. And I thought in the first half, Lady Vols were playing a style of game that they haven't played all season. They were jacking up so many threes. They were falling for Virginia Tech. They were not falling for Tennessee, and they weren't, again, most of them weren't bad looks. Tess Darby had a couple where she was open and made, shots she's made all season, and then suddenly they didn't fall. I don't know if it's because, you were in a neutral site. It was a court you never played at before. I don't know, what the case was there, but you had a lot of players who normally shoot really well did not shoot well in that game. And Rakia and Jordan Horston finally kind of turned things on in the second half a little bit more. You started, kind of getting a little bit going with Jillian Hollingshed a little bit more too on both ends of the court. But overall, I thought Tennessee, it just wasn't they didn't play a great game. I'm not disappointed. I'm disappointed they lost, but I'm not disappointed in their effort. I never questioned their effort in the game. You could tell they were still, fighting and doing, and attacking. Just maybe should have attacked a little bit more in the first half rather than settling for threes. But Blake, I mean, there's no shame in losing to a 1 seed, and Virginia Tech is a
No.
darn good team. I think we all, we're talking about this being a rematch, and this Tennessee team had been playing better than when they first played Virginia Tech back early in the season. But then we also talked about last week too on our show that you don't have Tamari Key anymore. You don't have Marty Suarez, who played a lot of minutes in that game too. That game you didn't have Rakia Jackson, Jillian Hollingshed, so you replaced a couple of bodies with ones you didn't have, and it would just basically look like a totally different roster for Tennessee compared to what it was when they first played. But I think Virginia Tech also, to their credit, I mean, they're just a really, really, really good team, and we saw it, firsthand again on Saturday, where they have some really good post players, but they have really good guard play, and I think that's where it's it really stood out in that game for me, was that Lady Vols guard play has been inconsistent this season, and I thought Virginia Tech just outmatched them by far on the guard play on Saturday. And again, not to take it, not to try to down any of Tennessee's players. I just think Virginia Tech's guards were phenomenal. So it's not not trying to put down Tennessee's guards. I just think they're inconsistent. They had some good moments on Saturday for sure, but Amor was just phenomenal. I mean that was a one of the better performances I've seen against the Lady Vols in a tournament setting in a while. I mean, that was a really, really good game.
Yeah. Then, like you said, I mean, that's why Virginia Tech they're in the Final Four now. And that's, we just kind of saw what they're capable of. And as you mentioned, I mean, I think just watching the game, and you mentioned earlier, they cut it to 1. I was trying to find the number with 6:15 to go in the fourth. They cut it to 1. And now you're thinking at that point, all right, like, momentum has swung here a little bit, and this is it, right? Like we've seen teams do this before. And then, from there, it was just kind of hitting that wall where they didn't score for, what was it? Oh, I'm trying to look up the number here. It was
It was
almost
3 or
3
4
minutes, I
minutes.
think. Yeah.
They had a couple of pretty extended scoring droughts in this game.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, like we talked about, just, yes, they cut it to 1 in the fourth quarter, but when you put yourself in that kind of hole early, you're always going to play the what if game from there. What if you don't do that, right? How much different is the game? And but yet, as you mentioned, it's not like they they were just done at that point, getting down as many points they did. They still fought back. Were right there, made it a 1-point game with basically 6 minutes to go, and had their chances. They just could not convert on them. And so yeah, like, I mean, we did talk a lot about, kind of that duo for Virginia Tech, and just sort of what the challenges were going to be, both on the perimeter and inside, going up against and you pointed out too, I mean, you go 3 of 17 from 3. It's just, that's a hard thing to do. Plus you've turned it over 18 times. And so when you just think about those possessions, right, you're not just giving away possessions on the 18 turnovers. You're essentially giving away possessions on 3-pointers because you're just not able to make many of them. And that was just, again, something that shooting at the wrong time, in these kind of tournaments, going to the men's side too. I mean, it's happened on both sides. Like, teams just get cold at the wrong time. And that was part of this, where they just didn't make enough shots. And as you talked about, just the scoring droughts. And yet again, unfortunately, that was a kind of a theme for, I think, both teams, men's and women's side. And the wrong spots, right? So
yeah. I was looking at, you said the 6:15 mark. Jazz Powell made that 3 to make it 53-52. And then immediately, Virginia Tech went and answered on the other end, made it 55-52. But it took from that 6:15 mark all the way up until, again, Jazz Powell again, that 3:37 mark for UT to score again. And it was on 2 made free throws. So you went almost 3 minutes without scoring there, and Virginia Tech was able to push it up to a 61-52 lead at that point. But I keep looking on here, like you also fouled a 3-point jump shot. Kayla King went and shot and made 3 free throws. Like that was the turning point. Funny enough, it was when Tennessee cut it to 1. It was like all of a sudden, I wouldn't say that woke Virginia up, but it was like Virginia Tech decided, okay, enough's enough. We're going to put our foot down. And you saw, again, you had a kind of trailer made a layup, and then she also made a free throw. And then again, their defense started playing better. And I think Tennessee also struggled and made a couple of bad decisions, but you had a couple turnovers by UT, and then again, Horston making that, fouling the 3-point shot there. And then you also, again, had Georgia Amor hitting some clutch shots down the stretch there. She made a couple she made 4 straight free throws, and then made a bucket as well. So she at one point had 6 straight points for Virginia Tech in the final like couple minutes there of that game. So, I mean, again, no shame in losing to a 1 seed, no shame in losing to this particular 1 seed. That's a really good team. And man, we talked last week. We were both hoping to see a Tennessee UConn matchup in the Elite Eight, and neither team took care of business.
No.
I mean, Lady Vols at least played, I think, relatively well. Like, I mean, it wasn't their worst game of the season. Whereas I think UConn, that might have been their worst game of the season. What they played. I don't want to talk too much about non-Lady Vols, but man, that 26 turnovers. I mean, that was they looked so disjointed. They looked almost like how the Lady Vols looked early in the season, where they weren't gelling and they were having issues with team, like the chemistry on the court. I mean, UConn looked rough against Ohio State. Man, credit again, Ohio State's a good team, but like, man, that was not the Elite Eight matchup I think a lot of us were expecting, was Ohio State Virginia Tech, and that's what we got. But again, I think those are two good teams, but Lady Vols and UConn both let us down. Blake let us down for having that huge matchup, but also, I mean, again, Lady Vols, I think we're playing a better team than what UConn was. Just wow. I mean, it's just funny to see. That's the first time in since 2005 that Gino hadn't made it to the or UConn hadn't made it past or been to the Elite Eight, and this is actually, I think, the second time ever, and the only other time was 1985. That the Elite Eight didn't have at least one of Stanford, UConn, or the Lady Vols in it. So like this is the second time ever in the women's game where one of those three teams wasn't in the Elite Eight. That's just how crazy. Again, look at the men's side of it, and look what that Final Four is, and look at the women's side, and look at what the Elite Eight and Final Four is. It's the year of parity in college basketball, except for on the women's side, you do have South Carolina. But aside from them, you now have Iowa, who they're a good team, but they they have done something that I didn't think they actually would be able to do, because they've had so many struggles in the NCAA tournament before. But man, Caitlin Clark is an incredible player. So they made it far. I mean, this has been a fun year to watch, and seeing a lot of these upsets happen on both the men's and women's side, and just seeing teams that you're not used to seeing make deep runs. So it's been nice. Again, aside from South Carolina, it's been nice seeing on the women's side too that they're taking after both. The men and women are kind of mirroring each other in terms of how March Madness is shaping out this year.
Yeah, no, for sure. So the Final Four is set on the women's side, as we know. As you mentioned, South Carolina, Iowa is fascinating for so many different reasons. That's on the one side, and then of course LSU, Virginia Tech. So who knows? Tennessee advanced.
We could have Blake, we could have what we have in college football sometime, or a couple times now, where it's a all SEC national championship game.
I think there's a good chance of that happening, but we'll see. I don't know. But look, it wouldn't be that surprising. I think based on where South Carolina and LSU have been at times. When we know where South Carolina has, but we kind of know where LSU was at one point. They wind up with a 3 seed, but still, I think it will be. Those are two pretty fun matchups, and so I'm pretty interested to see how they play out in those. I guess as a whole, overall, kind of, this is sort of the time to do this. Even though, as I always say now, it's like I feel like as soon as the clock hits zero for a college basketball team these days, it's like done. That's it. Like they're transfer. Like it's just the team just completely. Just I don't know, like everything changes so quickly now, where you don't really have that time to say, all right, let's talk about this team for 2 weeks and then we'll get on to next season. No, next season begins as soon as you're eliminated from the NCAA tournament or whatever. So as a whole, this team goes 25-12, gets to the Sweet 16, loses to a number 1 seed, Virginia Tech, who's in the Final Four. We talked about how dominant they looked in those 2 NCAA tournament games before that one. We've mentioned many times the schedule that they played, just a brutal schedule. So you can look at that record and say 25-12, but you do that knowing that the teams they lost to, again, there were a lot of really, really good teams on that schedule, and had some tough matchups, and we've talked about those before. I guess what are your overall thoughts just on the season as a whole? Because I think you've also brought it up before, just sort of for the program itself, knowing where it was at one point and things going in the wrong direction now, to kind of, maybe have a season like this to finish the way they finished, of course, not necessarily getting to the Final Four, but, playing some pretty good basketball down the stretch, as we had talked about. And so I guess what would you kind of look back on with this team, and how would you view this season as a whole?
Yeah. we talked a little bit before we started recording about it, and I was still trying to think and gather my thoughts on it. But like,
Yeah.
it's tough to grade this season because, like you said, looking just at the record and where you made it into both the SEC and NCAA tournaments, it's a very mixed bag. And then even if you take a deeper dive into the record and realize, how many really good teams Tennessee played,
Yeah.
I think if I had to give like a letter grade for it, I think it's from where the season started, considering who you play, considering how kind of new-ish the team was at the beginning of the year, I would say B plus for me, because it's not where you want to be historically for the Lady Vols. Getting to the SEC tournament title but not winning it, getting just to the Sweet 16 and losing to a 1 seed. Like, Lady Vols should be, historically they should be 1 seed or at least a 2 seed. Like, that's historically where the Lady Vols have been. So in theory, you shouldn't be losing to the 1 seed because you should be the 1 seed. But when you take into the greater context of where the program's been for the last decade, the depths they'd fall into, which again, were not like the depths of like the football or baseball programs at Tennessee,
Right.
but it was still, historically speaking, where the Lady Vols had never been before, where they were, 500 in SEC play, losing first round of the NCAA tournament, barely making the NCAA tournament. Now to back-to-back Sweet 16 appearances, which again, good. To me, it's a sign of there's progress. Like, we're seeing progress year to year. This year, you didn't have as many marquee wins, I think, as last season, because last season you had a really good start to the year. You beat a lot of solid and also some very good teams mixed in with your wins early in the year. And you got off to, I think, like a 19-1 start or something. Like, you got off to a really good start last year. It was, I think, as good as a start since maybe 98 team, I think, if I remember right, what they were showing that season. So I guess it would have been undefeated. But anyway, regardless, you started the year really well last year, whereas this year you didn't start well and you closed better. And you only had kind of one marquee win against LSU in the SEC tournament. But I think, again, you had to take a few things into consideration. You lost Tamari Key in December. You lost Mara Suarez, who was proving to be, someone you were playing off the bench quite a bit. I think around that same time, if not before. I don't remember her timeline of when she said that she was leaving the program, which now she's in the transfer portal, which we'll get to in a second. But you lost a starter, your one of the best shot blockers in Lady Vol history, if not the best shot blocker in Lady Vol history. But by the time it's all said and done, she will have the career record, and she already has a season record. And then again, you lose a bench player who was playing a decent amount of minutes for you, who had come back from a surgery the previous year. And you had a lot of new trying to figure out how you're going to play a player who demands a lot of usage because she's really good, and Rickea Jackson, along with someone like Jordan Horston, who also demands a lot of usage because she's really good, and trying to marry their playing styles onto the court. Then you had Rickea Jackson and that situation that, where she was on the bench or she wasn't playing at all and then on the bench. And then you had other injuries again, where you had Jillian, who had a concussion. I think I want to say Justine Pissat also had a concussion around that same time. There was a lot to kind of take in there, Blake, at the beginning of the year. And then to close the way you did, it's not disappointing to me. It's just, it's kind of a feeling, I guess, kind of on the men's side of almost like what could have been. If you look at early in the year against Virginia Tech, if they'd beaten Virginia Tech, if there was a couple other games that was close against really good teams, if you'd been able to win that Missouri game. We talked about that early on when we first started doing this show, because I think we started this not long after that Missouri loss had happened, or Mississippi State, pardon me, that double overtime loss, where that one, that was a key one. Again, Mississippi State, not the same echelon as a Virginia Tech or anything like that, but that was still a tournament team that you were on the road and should have probably won that game and lost in double OT. Like, that was a fun game to watch if you weren't a Lady Vol fan and stressed about it the whole time. But I think in the grand scheme of things, given what the losses you had this year in the roster, and given the schedule you play, I'd say B to B plus for me. Maybe a little bit more on the B side, but you did, again, I think, show progress. You made it back to the SEC tournament final for the first time in since 2015, I think, maybe 2015, 2016, right, something like that. You finished third in the SEC for a second straight year, again, with an SEC that was extremely top heavy with South Carolina, and then LSU having, yes, a weaker schedule, but also they're a very good team. Clearly, they're a Final Four team right now. And then getting, again, back to the Sweet 16 and being able to host again as a top 4 seed. Like, there was progress. I will be interested. We'll talk, I'm sure, in a future show or two about this off season and kind of the outlook for next year, because I think expectations are going to be pretty high again for next year, but it's also going to, depend on what you do in the transfer portal and if you're able to maybe get a last minute kind of recruiting addition to this class. But overall, Blake, it's a difficult season to really grade. You almost have to grade it in halves, because the first half is like a
Yeah,
C,
I would
C
agree with that.
minus, because
Yeah.
it's again tough schedule, but you didn't get any wins against any of the higher tier opponents. You did beat Colorado, but like you didn't beat any of the premier opponents you played. Second, once you get into SEC play, that's where again things really turned around for Lady Vols, and they had a very good SEC season, very good SEC tournament, and then not a bad NCAA tournament. So I that's why I think overall it's a B, maybe B plus for me for the year.
I think you pointed out something, and this is what I kind of got stuck on is, as I said, that they finished 25-12, and pointed out, well, they played a tough schedule. They played a lot of good teams. Well, that's where they expect to be, though. Like, they expect to be the
Mm-hmm.
team that is in that discussion, like, among the top teams out there. Even, we talk about them playing the top teams. Well, they're, as you said, they're supposed to be one of the top teams. And that's based on the tradition, the history, of the program. And so I think that is an interesting kind of point. And when you grade the season as a whole, is that you are kind of grading it in one way based on, well, not long ago, we certainly felt like we were much further away than what the objective and the expectations were every season. Now we maybe are not as far away, but we're still not there. And I think that's why, as you said, it's sort of just grading it in different parts of the season, and it makes it a little more, because those are the games, right? They used to schedule tough too. Like back,
Oh yeah.
even when they were winning 30 something games, right? They were scheduling
Mm-hmm.
tough then, and they were beating those teams.
Mm-hmm.
Now
You saw them playing UConn, Stanford, Notre
right.
Dame, like
Yeah.
Texas. They played those teams consistently. Yeah.
And they consistently beat them. And, I think that's what it comes down to now is taking that next step, I think, to getting there, to being able to win, let's say, even half of those games that you lost, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
things are much different. That's a much different conversation. And so, yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I think it's a hard one to grade, because I think it depends on how you're grading it. And it's like, well, you just grade it in the scope of this season as a whole, but it's hard to do that because you kind of have to tie in what the expectations are. And so, yeah, so I think it's an interesting spot now. And I think that's a good way to sort of transition into kind of looking ahead, because, as we said earlier, like, we're already on to next season. Like, that's
Yeah.
just how this thing works. And, we've talked about some significant roster, um, you know, changes, that either people staying, people going, and, Jordan Horston, obviously, that's going to add to the list of people who will not be back. We've already talked about Kia Jackson, Tamari Key. They're going to be back. And when you just kind of dive into where the roster's at, again, we know the transfer portal is such a big part of things, and we're still a long way from knowing what the roster is going to look like on November,
Ooh.
whatever. But I think you at least can have some optimism, um, you know, moving forward, again, understanding kind of how this roster was constructed, and feeling like if you can just fill some of those gaps, um, look, I mean, you've got plenty to build on, but hey, it obviously would have been nice to get Rakia Jackson and Jordan Horston back together. But I think we always knew that was going to be a long shot. So,
Yeah, to me, it was amazing getting Rakia Jackson back for another year like that. That
right.
surprised me. It
We
genuinely
didn't
did.
expect that. Yeah.
No,
Because when
I
we
was
brought up that
told.
mock draft, right? Like, we
Uh-huh.
said, they're like 5-6, 5-6. They were back to back
Mhm.
in one of the WNBA mock drafts. We're like, come on, you can't really expect them to come back, right? But
Yeah.
you did. So,
I was told like the week before she made the announcement that if NIL stepped up, that there was a chance that she would, but I still was like, okay, I mean, cool. If it did, like, I mean, I know NIL is
right.
obviously a factor. It wasn't the only factor. Clearly, we talked a little bit about it that I think last week or so of the money in the WNBA not being what it is, and then Tamari Key actually made a really good post on Twitter where she kind of laid out like in her notes app, like, reasons why, at least according to her, like why she came back, when she talked to other people, why they've decided to, forego going into the draft and return to college basketball. And one of the ones she mentioned was chartered flights. And I was like, ooh, WNBA is got to be gagging right now when they saw that one. But like you said, like Jordan Horston, I don't think she's had, to me, it's a little different. She's had injury issues. I don't, at least not Tennessee. Rakia hasn't. I don't remember if she got hurt any at Mississippi State, but like to me, it was a little different with Jordan Horston. That's why I was not expecting her to come back. She has the ability to go and, again, to make money in WNBA, but also make money where, if she wants to play elsewhere too. But like she's had injury issues. I think makes sense for her to say, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and go, because now with a lot of players withdrawing their names from the WNBA draft and staying, she's now moved up. I think during the game against Virginia Tech, they showed that she's now the number 3 prospect. So she went from being number 6 to number 3. Like that's a pretty good jump. Now she's in the top 3. Whether or not she gets taken number 3 is a different story, but she's likely a top 5 draft pick, because again, several of these top tier players like Rakia Jackson and a few others have already announced that they're not going to be going into the WNBA draft. But losing Jordan Horston is rough, because she was someone who literally did everything. She was, I don't know. I guess, I don't know if she got an assist in the Virginia Tech game, but if she did, she would have broken the tie she had with Kelly Harper, who at the time was Kelly Jolly, for I think 7th all time in assists at UT. She was a, well over 1,000 point scorer. I think she had 600 rebounds in her career. Like she did just about everything. She rebounded, she shot, she drove to the basket, she shot free throws, she stole the ball, she played good defense, she dished out assists. Like she played multiple positions. She played 1 through 4 at Tennessee in her career. Like she had to play point guard when they didn't have a point guard. So like she played a lot of different positions and did a lot during her time at Tennessee. So losing her is not, that is a big blow. And again, Marta Suarez now in the transfer portal, which I wasn't expecting her to come back. At least I wasn't. So that's not a huge surprise. But you lose those two. You lose Jordan Walker because she's out of eligibility. So she will not be coming back. I think Jazz Powell has a COVID year. I'll be very interested to see what she does. Does she decide, I can't remember if she's already a graduate transfer or not, because if she doesn't use that, then she can use, a graduate transfer year, or she can use, again, the free one-time transfer if that's the one she hasn't used. I don't know what happened, but she could transfer if she wants to, or she could stick around and realize, I'm going to be the number 1 point guard because there's no Jordan Walker. Like you do lose key players, but you don't lose. You're bringing back some good players too. You're bringing back Rakia Jackson and Tamari Key. You're bringing back a lot of your sophomores who are now going to be juniors. You're bringing back Tessa Darby. You're bringing back, again, players like Sarah Puckett and Caroline Stripling, who didn't play as much this year, or at least Sarah didn't as much this year as she did the previous year, but they're still, that's still a good player. That's a good role player, potential starter. You have Justine Passat, who is a McDonald's All-American, who didn't have to play a halt this year, which was nice to see that you didn't have to play a freshman for once. So like you have a lot of players you're bringing back who are very good players, and in some cases elite. And Rakia Jackson, Tamari Key, and Jillian Hollingshed, that's going to be, the growth that she showed this season was nice to see to build on to next year. But really, Blake, it's going to be, how do they attack this transfer portal? They need more talent. That was the biggest thing. I think you would agree, and I think a lot of the Lady Vols fans watching this would agree. That's the biggest discrepancy I saw between when Tennessee played UConn and South Carolina. Was Lady Vols didn't lack the effort. They didn't lack, in my opinion, some of the coaching. I think obviously Don Staley and Gino, I think right now, are better coaches than Kelly Harper. But I think people are too harsh on like Kelly Harper. I think she's a better coach than some people online would like to say. But I think the biggest difference was the athletes, and that we've said that multiple times throughout the years about Tennessee football and some of the, looking at against Alabama, looking against Georgia, and a few years ago against Florida, Tennessee lacked the athletes. They had the heart, they had the want to, they just didn't have the athletes. And I think it's the case for Tennessee. You had Rakia, you had Jordan Horston, and you had Tamari Key, but then she got hurt. You need more players who are able to attack and be multifaceted. You need speed. And you need someone who can help Jazz Powell be the point guard if she decides to, come back next year and be the point guard. You need more ball handlers who are capable of, making and completing good passes, and post players who are capable of catching those passes. Because there was a couple of times in that Virginia Tech game where I got frustrated because there's some good passes into the post and they had fumbled. I think both Caroline Stripling and Sarah Puckett had at least one of each, maybe two, times where there's a nice, good entry pass down low, and it was had to be bounced hard because you had the defender on them, and they just fumbled it and went out of bounds. So like, I want to see the Lady Vols go after a ball handler or two, maybe even another shooter, because right now it's Tess Darby and not a whole lot else. Maybe Justine was able to grow this offseason and develop her game a lot more on defense so she can play more minutes next year. And then she could also be another shooter. You can have Tess and Justine both posted there in the corners, and that's going to be dangerous for opponents. But I think you need to get a ball handler first. I think your post is fine. And then I think you need to find someone that can maybe fit a mold of a do-it-all type player. That's not going to be to the same caliber as Jordan Horston, but someone that can kind of fill that role. That is between like a 6'2" kind of wing guard forward hybrid who is able to go and rebound, but also is capable of making some shots. Basically, they need someone. I think they need more offense, because I think offense this year was good. It was actually better at times this year than it had been in previous years. But I think there was still plenty of times this year where, as you said earlier, both the men's and women's teams just had too many offensive struggles. And I think, again, while the offense was better this year for the Lady Vols than it had been in a few years past, they still struggled, I think, at times to get things going on offense. If Rakia Jackson was having an off night, or if Jordan Horston was having an off night, it was hard to get things going. So you need more consistency somewhere. Maybe Tamara Key provides that with, her coming back and being healthy and having that post presence of, we just dump it down there, have her try to force it in. If not, she gets fouled. And she goes to the free throw line. So it's going to be very intriguing to see how the roster construction happens and how many spots do end up, for sure opening up. Because right now they don't have anybody coming in. Like, there's no recruiting class,
Right. Yeah.
No transfers committed. But Blake, they're already, as on the men's side too, already a lot of names in that transfer portal as it is. And the season technically isn't even completely over with yet. So Lady Vols already have, one player contributing to that number with Mara Suarez, but a lot of interesting names already in there. I mean, there's a couple that I've already looked at and gone, wouldn't mind seeing Lady Vols go knock on that door to see if they can get them to come to campus sometime.
Yeah, I think you brought up something like that, and I think that's, it's one thing to have just that dominant player or two players that can do what they can do, because as we've said before, like, sometimes that can get you very far. But if you're going to be, the type of team that can go beyond where you are now, like, it is going to take, I think, more overall depth, because again, you never know when injuries are going to happen. Like, that's just part of the game. You can never predict when those are going to take place. And it's just having, I think, more options, because the thing about the transfer portal too, and I know we've said this before on the men's side, but it's like, there is no such thing as a guarantee when it comes to the transfer portal.
Yep.
Like, and I think that's important, because chemistry, like, how many times have we seen and said, oh, this person, oh, they average 20 something points a game. Like, they're going to come in, oh my goodness, like, they're going to be fantastic. And this is going to be the best team we've ever seen. But then, like, the chemistry just isn't there. Right. And that's why I think it is like the men's and women's side. You have so many moving parts now that it's so hard to know, I think, exactly how everything's going to mesh. So it is, I think, which they do their homework. They understand the players that are going to fit their system. And, they have a really good idea of who that is. But I do think that is becoming the norm now, where you're swinging, you're taking that big swing, but you better hit, get the hit, because if you don't, like, it just becomes that thing where, every other team's kind of doing the same thing now. And I think it's just really identifying what you need. And like you said, I think for this team, it is kind of clear what they need and what they need to focus on. And it'll be interesting to see kind of what path they go with some of the names, like you said, that are already in there. There will be obviously many more to come, but it will be interesting to see kind of who the priority players are for them looking at it.
And you mentioned the chemistry thing. I mean, this team is an example of that. I mean, I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. I think they would admit it, that, the chemistry was not there at the beginning of the season with all the transfers. Again, Rakia Jackson had to be sat down and did not play. It's pretty clear that something was off there. And to her credit, and the coaching staff's credit too, no one gave up on each other. Like, they all stuck with it and clearly worked out in the end here. And Rakia is now coming back for another season. You don't come back for another season if you have sour grapes. So, like, things worked out clearly. But this team, like you said, Blake, this team was an example of the chemistry not working, at least initially. It ended up getting better, But yeah, just because you bring someone in who, like Rakia Jackson, who I knew she was going to be a star or had the potential to be a star because of how well she played at Mississippi State, wasn't working out early on. And then when it did work, boy, did it work when she scored 20 plus points, I think, in like 7 or 8 straight games. But yeah, I mean, like you said, you could have someone look really good on paper and it not work out. Or on the flip side, you can bring someone in and people are like, why are they bringing this person in? Like they have, whether it's injury history or, you look, maybe this wasn't a good fit at the school they're at previously. Why are they bringing them in? Like they didn't have a good, good career at that school. And then they all of a sudden, boom, clicks. And all of a sudden they're a really darn good player for your team. So like it can happen for, both ways. But like you said, it's already starting. Like I do hope, as much as I like the fact that players can transfer and have the freedom, I think they need to set more stringent timelines on this, because it sucks for a coach to have to worry about in the middle of postseason play. Like you may have talked about it in some of the men's side of things. Like Vanderbilt had a player on the men's side go to the transfer portal while they're playing in the NIT. Like that shouldn't be a thing that coaches or players really have to worry about. Like that should be something that it only happens after like, April 15th or whatever, like after the season's well over, like after the Final Four and championships have all been done. You should have a date where, okay, now the portal's open, free to go. Obviously, I know you can go in the portal anytime during the season too, but like maybe there should be a date where it closes off and then reopens. Like I just think I don't mind players having the freedom and being able to do what they want. I know technically coaches can leave whenever they want to also, so maybe, whatever, maybe they need to address that too. But like, I just think it's a headache for coaches and players both, in my opinion, to have it happening right now, like immediately after the season's over. So that was kind of a tangent, but it will be intriguing to see who all Tennessee targets, because again, they don't have a recruiting class coming in right now, but transfer portal is also recruiting. Like people, I think, are still kind of adjusting to that. I counted coaches' recruiting ability and what they can do in the transfer portal too. And the Lady Vols had a really good recruiting class this past year, looking at not just the freshmen, but again, you bring in Rakia Jackson, you bring in Jazz Powell, who is a big contributor for you. Jillian Hollingshed became a really big contributor for you down the stretch too. And Jasmine Franklin had a nice role for you. That's another player I forgot to mention, that she's gone, that you're losing off this roster too, she was a good bench player for you in the post. So you have several open roster spots. It helps you get Rakia and Tamari Key coming back for another year. Those are two that I wasn't expecting, a month ago to return. So that helps. But yeah, like it's going to be just going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting because, like you said, I don't think you can ever have too many good players. Look at South Carolina. If you try to shut down Boston, you've got Beal. If Beal's not having an off night, again, if it's not Boston, Cardoso can do a lot of things, especially defensively, but she's also capable of playing well offensively. Like you look at that. Look at Virginia Tech, who just played. I think Kitley didn't have her best game of all time, but Georgia Amore went off. You also had Sewell, who's a really good post player. Like if you're a elite team, and Lady Vols have been elite teams in the past, it wasn't just Candace Parker carrying a bunch of scrubs. She had a really good teammates. Look at the teams in the 90s. They were consistently packed with a lot of talent. The best teams in both men's and women's basketball don't just have one star player that carries a bunch of kind of average to above average players. You have at least two, but sometimes really three kind of players who are capable of any night going out there and dropping 20, 25 and being your main person that night. Or again, having a three-headed monster that can just wreak havoc on a team regardless. So I think they need to try to go find another kind of star-ish player. I don't know how intriguing Tennessee will be for that, because you have Rakia Jackson and because you have Tamari Key returning, but I still think there's room to add at least one more very high talented player from the transfer portal. And there will be one. If there isn't already, there will be several big names that go in and you're going, oh, that's someone that we should try to go get.
Yeah. It will be interesting. As we said, the transfer portal never stops, and roster construction is the thing that never stops for coaches these days. And that will be the case up until, as we mentioned, honestly, well into the summer, because that's usually how it works these days in college basketball. But Nathaniel, that was the season for the Lady Vols. We said, just kind of looking at things, what happened this season, looking ahead, and we will continue to do that here at Southeastern 14. We'll do more of these episodes moving forward. Not exactly sure what our schedule will be since there are no games, but again, we fully anticipate there being roster movement because that's just what happens. So we will talk about it and discuss a lot of different things. So anything else, Nathaniel, before we wrap up?
I do just want to thank again, like you said, we're only in our 7th episode, but I do want to thank those who've already jumped on board
Yeah.
here, even though we started this late in the season, kind of getting into postseason play. Thank you to everyone who has watched it and shared it, and again, maybe have subscribed to the channel because of it too. So
Yeah.
I know Blake's very appreciative of that, and
Yes.
I am too. Even though I just do this one, I know that it's nice to see Southeastern 14 grow. And if you guys want to stick around for football season, again, if you're a Tennessee football fan, as a Lady Vol fan, then Southeastern 14 is going to have a lot about Tennessee football over the next, well, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months, because there's going to be a lot to talk about. We're in the middle of spring practices and stuff now too, and of course Tennessee has a 5-star quarterback and already returning from a 11-win season, so there's going to be a lot there. But again, I do just want to thank everyone who's already jumped on board and left comments, and whether it's on here or in Facebook or in Twitter. Just thank you for all of you who've been here long for the ride already. And like Blake said, we've got a lot more still coming. Looking forward to this off season, and then hopefully, as long as things stay where they are now, Blake, we'll be here for the beginning of next season, and hopefully that'll be a really fun one to talk about.
Yes, for sure. And I'm sure you'll see Nathaniel popping up on other stuff we do here at Southeastern 14. Again, we do appreciate the great feedback you guys following the show, even though we started late in the season, of course. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to do each week. And again, we will talk more about that moving forward and lots of other coverage, SEC wise, Tennessee wise. You can find it all here, Southeastern 14. Hit that subscribe button. And again, we appreciate you guys watching, and we'll talk to you again here soon at Southeastern 14.